Hello friends, I am reluctantly recording a video but excitedly recording it about something that I'm passionate about, which is the ADHD assessment and diagnostic process. And I thought, you know what, let's just step this out for people. Okay, step one would be, if you think that you may have ADHD, maybe you've seen stuff on the internet, maybe you've been talking to people, maybe you've read something in the news and you're like, that could be me, or that lines up, or that makes sense, etc. The very first step, even before you pick up the phone to a GP, is to do some research and get some education around what ADHD actually is. Now, you can read books like the one that I was harping on about here. There's a whole bunch of others, and I will pop them in a link. And there's heaps of podcasts, etc., that will start to give you a bit of education around what ADHD actually looks like and the differences in men and women. Cool. Then I would do some screening tests. Now, screening tests do not equal a diagnosis, but there are two main screening tests that are used in the diagnostic process that you can actually access online. And the first one is the ASRS, and I have popped a link in the thingamajiggy for you to go and have a look at that. And then the second one is the WFIRS. Now, and maybe you could also write down how you think ADHD has tripped you up from your very earliest memory to all the way up to here. So a bit of a timeline, because if you do go through the diagnostic process, the assessor, whether that's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, is going to ask you about that stuff, because ADHD is a lifelong and developmental condition. So it's going to be present before the age of 12. Cool. The other thing to note here is that when you're being assessed for ADHD, the psychologist or psychiatrist is going to be testing you and screening you for other stuff that could be mimicking ADHD, right? So they're going to be looking for other mental health conditions or lifestyle factors that could be contributing to your experience. Things like bipolar, they're going to be looking at things like anxiety, depression, and all of these guys tend to hang out with ADHD anyway, but it could be that actually these are some of the reasons why you're having trouble in the first place. Also, another thing to think about, and that you will get asked about, is whether your symptoms are actually due to some lifestyle factors. So maybe you have a bit of a, fun time with the old smoking of the cannabis, or drinking, maybe what some might say a bit too much. I don't know. Could be on a daily basis, could not be. I'm not judging. But maybe that could be a contributing factor. Or perhaps there's some unresolved trauma that you have been through that could be contributing to your challenges. Or it could be lifestyle, like diet. If you are, a lover of the junk food, that could be something that is contributing to how your brain might be functioning. So if you reckon you've done these tests and you're like, I think maybe if I controlled these lifestyle factors, that maybe those symptoms would reverse or go away, that's something that's good to know. Next bit, is an assessment actually required, right? This is a personal choice, but when we're thinking about the degree of impact, we're thinking about the chronicity, the severity, the frequency, the intensity of the things that you're experiencing. Everyone sort of exists on the spectrum of ADHD, but if those things are actually impacting your life and they're creating a flow-on effect where there is significant detrimental impact, then maybe a diagnosis is actually going to be quite helpful. Then the next step is to go to your GP. Now, take all these things to your GP, take your reports, take all of your information, because they will start that kind of screening process and start questioning whether it's actually ADHD. Now, this is part of the diagnosis and assessment process that people probably need to be aware of. It is could be quite an emotional experience for someone to even take those steps of doing the pre-screening tools and to put down their developmental and lifespan history, and then to go to a GP who's like, hey man, you also have a diagnosis of GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. Do you reckon that could be a thing? And like, that just might be enough for someone to just blow up, which would be very ADHD actually. So the two options for referral for assessments are going to be either to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Now, there's significant differences between these two options. If you are thinking that if you do have ADHD and you'd like to try medication, assessment by a psychiatrist is going to be the way to go, because a psychiatrist is the only one of those two that can actually prescribe and administer medication. Psychologists who have done specific training and are accredited to assess and diagnose ADHD, you could absolutely go to a psychologist. The thing is that if you do want to try medication, you are then going to have to go through the whole process again and be assessed again by a psychiatrist. If you get assessed by a psychologist and they've done, the whole gamut of other tests that go with the diagnostic process, it doesn't actually mean that if you take your report from your psychologist to a psychiatrist that they are going to accept that that report is true and give you medication. How do I know this? I've been through it. So I was initially assessed by a psychologist, and then a couple of months down the line I was like, maybe I will try medication, and I had to go through the whole process again, which was time consuming, upsetting, and it cost a lot of money. Not fun. Okay, so if you choose option 1 is your psychologist, option 2 is your psychiatrist, you've got either the public system or the private system. Now, there's going to be price discrepancies between the public and private system. So the public system might be a little less expensive. However, I think the wait lists mostly are around 3 to 6 months long, which could be a deterrent for people. If you decide to go privately, you're going to have to pay more, but maybe your wait times are less. Same with psychologists. If you go through the public system in Australia, you might get, your Medicare rebate and things like that. So it might be cheaper, but again, wait lists. We just don't have enough people doing this stuff, and that is a problem for a different day. The other thing is that there is a range of assessment models that exist. So perhaps a psychiatrist might be looking at more of a clinical model, and a psychologist might be looking at more of like a multidisciplinary model that takes into consideration other tests that maybe a psychiatrist wouldn't use. And for some, it might be 1 session. For others, it might be up to 3 sessions, right? It varies, and this is something that if you do want to go through this process, as you're ringing up looking for referrals and places to go, this would be a question that I would definitely ask. So then kind of what happens, depending on whether you do it in person or whether you're doing it online or a fusion of both, you'll probably get sent a bunch of psychometric evaluation tests, more questionnaires. You'll get a observer informant, which could be a parent, a spouse, a sibling, etc., someone who has known you for a very, very long time. They will also be completing an assessment as well on your behalf, because your experience is going to be biased. So we actually need that significant other perspective of whether this is actually, something that's been going on for a really long time. They might ask for school reports. Again, these are like sort of more impartial perspectives. Heaps of people don't have school reports still available if they're adults. For me, like my parents weren't alive, so I couldn't ask them. So, at the time, I was like, who do I talk to? So I got my older brother to be able to have that conversation on my behalf. Likely what's going to happen is that there's going to be a clinical interview. So whoever's assessing you is going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to ask about your childhood experiences. They're going to probably ask about what your mother was sort of doing in her life when she was pregnant with you. They're looking for, you know, everything that's happened to you, even when you were, you know, in here. What was going on? What are these other contributing factors? There is no one gene for ADHD, so you can't just test for that. It is a combination of genetic factors and environmental factors. So it's not a simple thing to determine. That's why it generally takes a couple of sessions with a trained assessor, a clinician, to be able to really ascertain whether it's ADHD or whether it's something else in particular. Okay, I think that may answer the question. Questions. And if there are any more, please send them through. I may or may not be able to answer them, but I enjoy trying. And yeah, education across the board is key. And education is really the biggest and most exciting and interesting part of this. And yeah, I love education. Okay, have a good day.